My name is Hannah Sheehy, and I am a part of the Graduate College of Education through Morningside University. Today, I will be explaining my research study on small group skills-based instruction to foster literacy. I currently teach 7th and 8th grade English Language Arts in Sioux City, Iowa at North Middle School. So thinking about the problem identified in my presentation stemmed from knowing my student population and knowing that adolescents are more likely to be disengaged from reading and wanting to read, as well as wanting to perform well academically in English language arts class. So this is a big problem because all the reading that we do in school is important and essential for students in the future. So about 6 to 8 million adolescents are under or deficient in reading comprehension. So this problem is a huge problem in our society, and I was very interested in figuring out how I could get my students motivated and increasing in their reading comprehension. So this study is quantitative. It is an independent samples t-test. There is a control group and an experimental group. The control group is going to be undergoing traditional teaching, whereas the experimental group underwent small group skills-based teaching, which I will explain in this PowerPoint. So taking a look at what I was looking for when assessing my students was the importance of all of the reading comprehension skills all into one. So this is an example from the pre-assessment that I gave my students to determine where they were with their reading skills. So pre-assessment test, I looked at 4 different categories to determine what interventions they needed and to determine what my instruction would look like in the classroom. So thinking about this, you can see word recognition, vocabulary knowledge, syntactic knowledge, and reading comprehension are all essential to students' understandings of using literacy and being able to make meaning of the literacy that they are performing in. So you can see through MyLexia Rapid programming that it gives the teacher a dashboard of information as well as percentile ranks to show where a student starts on their baseline score and where a student grows to as they increase in their skill-based of these 4 categories. So you can see it gives percentiles as well as it shows growth, which is great for educators to use for data-driven instruction. So using MyLexia Rapid helped me determine what group students would be placed in if they were in the experimental group. So looking at students' Lexile reader measures, I grouped them by Lexile level. So I had a low group, a low mid group, a mid group, and a high group. So the way that I chose text for them to be working on and the way that I chose their specific interventions were all based on MyLexia Rapid data. So this is super important to how the groups are going to function and how groups are going to collaborate based upon where their Lexile reader measure was. So the purpose for literacy grouping was to play upon students' strengths. As adolescents, students love working in partners, they love working in groups, they love being able to collaborate and socialize and do so in a productive manner. So literacy learning is a great opportunity for students to be able to work with 5 other students who are in similar abilities, as well as work on specific skills together. Teacher led for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then students are working collaboratively within their groups, and then they are working independent to see if they could learn that skill and transport that skill into their own knowledge. So thinking about this, you can see that the experimental group had a great environment set up for them to be able to gain reading comprehension skills, as well as focus on specific deficits that they were faced with in their pre-assessment. So thinking about the literature review and what it says shows that research supports that students are at risk in all academic areas. Students must be able to read, write, listen, and speak proficiently in order to succeed in any academic area. So this is a big issue in the United States because students are falling behind, students are not being given the proper interventions, and teachers are teaching to a one-size-fits-all model. So this instructional model of my research shows the difference between traditional whole group instruction as well as the difference if students are given small group instruction and given more responsibility and independence for their learning. Another big thing is students' attitudes. With the increase of technology, students are more or less likely to be focused and want to read a regular book. So I could see that this is something that I am seeing every day in my classroom, as well as experiencing students feeling like reading is just a competition and it is not a meaningful process where they are pulling meaning, making connections to their life. So this is something that shows that teachers need to vary up their instruction, especially in the literacy environment. It cannot be traditional whole group instruction for the whole entire semester or 2 semesters. It has to be varied up depending on what skills they're trying to learn and what skills they're trying to foster in students. So the methods for my experimental and control group showed that I put this into place for 10 weeks. So I'll first talk about my student population. So my student population consisted of, at a big diverse school, with about 72% free and reduced lunch. The people in my study were 44% Caucasian, 37% Hispanic, and 19% biracial. So there was a total of 44 7th grade English language arts students in this study. So the experimental group had 24 students and the control group had 22 students. So it really was even terms with how students were selected for this study, as it was random, and students in my classes are English language learners as well as a mix of general education students. So you can see this study really focuses on, is small group instruction more fruitful to students for learning reading comprehension, or is whole group more fostering for literacy? So we can see for the small groups that the progress was monitored every single day, and that the small groups were based upon interventions that students needed for word recognition, vocabulary knowledge, syntactical knowledge, or reading comprehension. So every single day, students were given a task. Their task was posted up at the board. Their must-dos for the day were the tasks that they had to complete, whether it was reading a text and close reading it within their group, whether it was working on inferencing about characters, whether it was characterization, whether it was answering text-based questions. Students were given tasks every single day. And if some groups worked faster than others, those groups had may-dos, which were tasks that if students had time, they could complete. So the way that the small groups were set up is they were obviously grouped by Lexile in the low, mid, and high group. So students were given articles and text that were at their specific Lexile levels to see how well they could do at that level to grow. So each class period was about 52 minutes, and this also was a very short time period for students to really get in and get to work. So students were put on timers to make sure that they were being held accountable. So the teacher met with every single group during every single class period for about 5 to 7 minutes, and students were then on their own working in their group for the remainder of the periods with what the must-dos were for that day. So students were held accountable for those directions to be followed. The whole group instruction was Iowa Core aligned, and this was done using the Holt McDougall Houghton textbook with anchor text. So before even reading this text for the quarter, the teacher would explicitly teach the vocabulary, and then the teacher would have the students go question by question, paragraph by paragraph, teacher led, with students answering the questions, engaging in deep discussion, and students were working directly with the teacher. So you can see that the pretest independent samples t-test shows that the p-value was 0.755. So the pretest for group 1 and group 2 showed that they were very statistically similar starting off. So you can see my hypothesis is that the experimental group would be better off and grow in their reading comprehension if they received small group instruction. So let's take a look at the post-test data. So you can see that my hypothesis was supported, but it was in very close proximity to each other. So you can see that, yes, the experimental group did better in the end, but not by much. So you can see that the p-value ended up being 0.698. So thinking about this shows that maybe if the study had been longer, different results could have been conveyed. So here's some more information to show the mean of the pretest and the post-test data. Okay, so you can see, looking at the visual, that the groups were very, very similar, which was very interesting because they were both receiving reading instruction, but in 2 different formats. So you can also see that each group had similar demographics and each group was randomly selected. However, we can't come to any conclusions that this instruction was better just because the groups were so similar within their data. So the experimental group compared to the control group did show that they did better. However, the data was very close, so the hypothesis was not supported. So you can see that implications show that explicitly teaching reading comprehension strategies is beneficial to students, as well as having different modes of instruction is beneficial, as well as using data Data must be used to show where students are and to know the profile and the demographics and the dashboard of all of their reading skills of reading comprehension, word recognition, vocabulary, syntactical knowledge. All of this comes into play when teaching students strategies to be able to make meaning when given a text. We can also see that there are some limitations of this study. These 7th grade ELA classes were randomly selected. They could have been measured up to be exactly the same populations of students, exactly the same ethnicities. That could have been done, but it wasn't. It was random. You can also see that if different types of curriculum could have been used, that could have impacted the results. The small group received My Lexia as their curriculum, and the whole group teaching received Holt, McDuffel, Hufflington as their curriculum. So you can see they were both reading different stories. The Lexile ranges were in different ranges. The small groups were receiving tailored instruction to their Lexile level. It was also my students' first time in small groups. They were used to learning in whole group instruction for literacy learning. They were also grouped by Lexile level. So all of these things show that these are limitations. These are things that could be changed, as well as things could have turned out different if these things were different. So you can see as well that My Lexia testing did take place at the beginning and the end of the experiment. What if this had been implemented for longer? Any of those things could have impacted everything as well. So taking a look at my summary of all this information, what does it tell us? Well, first of all, teachers have to use data to make decisions in their classroom. They have to. If you don't use data, then what are you going off of to play to your students' strength and to grow your students in their skills, right? So instruction has to be differentiated. No one student is the same. Instruction must be differentiated, as well as what does the classroom environment look like? What does the seating look like? What are the students used to? You must know who your students are and how you are going to get them to where they need to be. So this can also go to show that reading and writing are very complicated structures. Students must be given a variety of resources and a variety of learning opportunities to grow their skills, to motivate them, to engage them, to get them excited about what literacy learning is all about. All of these things come into play when thinking about how students are going to do. As well as students were assessed over on the computer. So thinking about that, use your technology to your advantage. However, sometimes paper and pencil is just as good as technology. So thinking about this whole study as a whole really shows that middle school needs more attention. Elementary and high school are constantly being assessed, as well as constantly being written about in research and literature reviews. The reason why I chose to do this study is because middle school is an area that is often overlooked, and I feel as it is a very complex time of life for students, especially in their literacy journeys. So I believe that middle school English language arts teachers should be mindful of how important it is to provide proper interventions to students so they can grow, so they can be in a fruitful, supportive environment that helps them become the best they can be with their literacy learning. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Keep reading, keep understanding, keep learning. Educators are constantly coming up with so many different resources. Keep doing awesome things, teachers. Thank you so much for listening.